Liquid sims in C4D that aren't goo, that actually look like liquid. Liquid sims in C4D that aren't goo, that actually look like liquid. This is what I've been on the quest to discover the best way to set up your actual simulation so that you can actually create liquids inside of C4D's new liquid sim. And I have done this tutorial about 50 times and it keeps turning into this colossal thing, so I'm trying to streamline it as much as possible. And what we're going to get out of this video is, one, you'll be able to download a project file that is going to have these settings kind of built in for you to play along with. But because there is so much to liquid and so many different variables and so many different ways to go about approaching it to get different results, this is probably going to turn into a series. And I keep trying to put too much into one video, so we're going to break this up into a series. But what's going to happen is I'm going to give you project files throughout the process. So, and I'm going to do those available on my Patreon. There's going to be a free one today for free Patreon members, but then I'm going to start including more and more Patreon like project files, and they're going to go beyond like the viewport render stuff, and we're going to do like render ready things with lighting and everything. Like this lava one will be on there for patrons that you'll be able to download the scene that will be render ready, right? Pretty cool. So we're going to dive into that, but there's a couple things I want to talk about really quick before we break up into how, what settings you need to change, what ones you need to ignore to not get overwhelmed, because that's what happens every time, and you get into this weird balancing act between balancing the simulation settings and the viscosity and the constraints of the actual liquid, and you go back and forth with substeps and these iterations and those, and it becomes this like just juggling act of too many variables, and none of the variables make sense from like a natural way. You've got density, which is set to a default of 1,000, but viscosity and surface tension are a default of 0.1. Is that the middle or the bottom, the top? Am I supposed to go up from there, down from there? Why isn't everything just set to 1 and I go left and right from there? Why aren't things sliders where I go from like glue to something really runny? Like what are these? These seem like arbitrary numbers when you're trying to figure this out and learn it, and everything is interconnected between like 3 different simulation substep settings and iteration settings and all these things, and those are all connected. And again, it's all still part of the particle system, which is both the downfall and both the absolute best part about this liquid sim at the same time, which is what makes it frustrating, because I want to get past the frustrating part of figuring out the actual liquids part and get into the fact that, yes, you can just combine cloth sims with liquid sims with fire sims. You can have a cloth sim that starts emitting liquids that then burst into flames. And yes, you can do that inside of here, which is amazing because they're all part of the same system, and you can drive them with the turbulence and stuff like that because they're things that you already know how to do. It's just figuring out and getting over that initial hurdle of being able to control the liquid to get it to do what you want it to do, because without proper instruction, it's a mess to figure out. So that being said, let's talk about some instructors and things that are available to you beyond myself, because you should watch other people too, but watch mine definitely and leave a like. But yeah, so here's the thing. You got lots of tutorials and stuff out there on goo, because that's kind of what C4D is made up for. You've got Maxon teaching you how to make syrup. You got EJ from iDesign teaching you how to make honey. You've got people like Virtually Visual. Jess is making some really pretty cool liquid sim things. And you've got people like Kyle Sullivan Design, who is making really cool things, but they're all kind of like goo based. But Kyle and Jess both are just like designers at heart. Like they understand colors and aesthetics better than I ever will, and their stuff is great. You should definitely check them out. They both also teach, so definitely check them out. Okay, there's a link for them below. But then I discovered somebody that was actually making liquids, and somebody who seemed to understand how the particle sims actually worked. And that person is Double Motion Design. Now, they also have a Patreon that you can get on, and I suggest you do that, and you get their project files. Now, they're all viewport render things, and don't, get distracted by these visuals. I'm 99.9% sure that most of these are actually just AI renders from things that are similar to what they actually create, which is fine. Because you can see here, we've got waves. He creates the waves. Like, this is what I want to see from a liquid sim. We've got things getting smushed away. That's cool. We've got, water waving around across a product. We've got splashes. He's got waters smashing into each other. He's got crown splashes. These are good. These are all good. And he provides the project files. I just want to let you know that the project files are going to be viewport render things. They're not going to have materials. They're not going to be Redshift, all that stuff. They don't look like this, okay? Mine, what I'm going to do, I'm going to try to give you project files that are render ready, that have all the settings. So you will get my settings, my materials, everything in there, okay? And, you let me know that I might need to charge more, because there's starting to get to be a lot of stuff on my Patreon that's for $5 a month that, it's pretty good. So definitely sign up for that before I increase the price, right? Anyway, okay, so let's dive into setting up liquids, changing the settings that I think need to be changed to create actual liquid, and the best order of operations in order to do that so that you can actually craft what you want to craft while you're going. And then once we have that set up, that project file will be available to download for free to everybody with the link below, and then we'll do like a render ready one that's available and some more project files. Those are all going to be available probably through Patreon after this, and we're going to keep doing a series, so let me know what you want to see next, okay? First off, we're going to do a fill emitter. So the next tutorial will obviously do a regular emitter, because I think those two together are important. Okay, so here's what we've got. We've got a box here that we created, very simple box. It's a cube that I push the top down. Fine, inset, push it down. Then we've got a cube above it that fits inside of it. We're going to raise it up a bit and let that be our water spawner, right? So we've got our container and our water spawner. Now, our container, we need to put a collider on. So right click, simulation tags, collider. Again, the best part about Liquid Sims is it uses all the same settings as all the other particle stuff. We're going to put that on both our backdrop and our ground. Now, with our water selected, we're going to go to simulate, and we're going to emitters, and this is where we're going to choose liquid fill emitter. So the difference between liquid fill emitter and an emitter is that on the liquid fill emitter, you don't have to add the modifier of liquefy. It's built into it. And it's basically going to say, hey, use a shape to create a volume of water. Okay, boom, liquid fill emitter on. We're going to hide the Wawa shape. And inside of here, we're going to make sure in our emission, we do have that Wawa shape here, Wawa. My little 1-year-old says Wawa, so it's in my head. Okay. All right, so let's hit play. Boom. That's not water, right? That's not a liquid. Come on. So what do we change first? This is the main thing we're going to change. So we're going to go in here, and I'm going to talk about how to both learn this and control this to understand it in a way that you understand what needs to be tweaked and what doesn't, okay? So here's how we're going to learn this. We are going to go into our liquid fill here, and you go to properties, and here's where the constraints are, okay? We don't want to touch those except for ease in. I think this is a very important one that should be on by default. I think we should do about like 20 frames maybe for that. And what that does is that provides a grace period or a transition period between being just a particle and turning into a liquefy particle. So basically, if you have a shape that just like when you hit play, it just explodes, like when you had Voronoi fracture on an object and you hit play when you had a rigid body on it and it would just explode, that was what was happening. So we have to add in a little ease in period that's going to allow it to filter in and just work a little cleaner. I think that simple of a thing changes a lot. Okay, now we're also not going to worry about collisions, but in order to understand what these things are, let me kind of break them down in a way that I think makes sense to me. Constraints: target density, viscosity, surface tension. These are all things that are going to be how the particles react to each other inside of the simulation. Particles to particle. This is the relationship between those two things. Collisions are going to be particles to the outside world. So collisions adding the viscosity, so in the collisions, when you crunch up the friction and the stickiness, it's not going to change how that particle reacts to the other particle. It's going to change how that particle reacts to something like a box or a surface of another object. Okay? Constraints inside the simulation, collisions, things that affect the outside. Both of those things together will affect how your liquid acts, but only one of them is really affecting the way the liquid itself is on a fundamental level, and that is the constraints. That being said, there are several settings here that you can change that will completely change the way your water looks without touching your constraints. And to be honest, you probably won't need to touch your constraints to get the results you want. And that's what's weird, because that feels like that should be all you touch to adjust your liquid, at least to me. And let me go on a little tiny rant here about this Maxon, okay? Target density 1000, viscosity 0.1, surface tension 0.1. I have no sliders. I have no frame of reference on what the hell these numbers mean. Is 0.1 a lot? Is 0.1 a little? Should I go from 0.1 to 0.2? Should I go from 0.1 to 100? In the target density, should I go from 1,000 to 1,001? Is that going to change it? Or do I need to go all the way up to 2,000? Give me a range. Give me a slider. Give me something that's like glue to runny water, right? Give me something, or give me something consistent where it's like target density is going to be set to 1. And if I change it from 1 to 2, that's like the same as 1,000 to 2,000. Whereas viscosity, if I change it from 1 to 2, that's going to be the same as going from 0.1 to 0.2 here. Like, let me just see numbers that make sense so that I can adjust things accordingly. And maybe that doesn't make sense. I think a slider should always be the answer. I need a range. Give me a range. And I don't mean the slider that's like in the render settings where you can go from, 16 all the way up to 13 billion for the samples. That's not what I mean. Give me, let me hover over this and be like, normally water is this. Give me that. Like, that's it. I'm hopping off my soapbox. I've been dealing with this too much this last week. I've been pulling my hair out, figuring out this liquid. And part of it is the fact that these numbers just don't make sense. I know that they do mathematically and technically for the system, but as someone who's trying to learn it and at a user experience level, these are silly. Okay? All right. Sorry you had to see that. Okay. All right. So let's just close those. Get them out of here. Now, things that are important here. Simulation scene radius, dampening simulation scene. That means that there are settings somewhere that are controlling the settings of this liquid. And that is what we want to figure out. And that is in Control D. Control D will bring up your settings. Now, inside of the Simulations tab, you have seen Simulations, Pyro, Particles, and Liquids, right? Now, you have the Simulations tab inside the Simulations tab, so you've got Simulation Inception here, and this is actually very important for figuring out the particles. Also, particles, somewhat the substeps here are important more for emitters than the actual fill emitter. We'll come back to that later. And then the liquids also is a very important part of this. Now, so all three of those three things mixed together with the settings of the liquid and all of those things together are what create the actual thing. So you get into this crazy balancing act of constraints versus simulation subsets versus iterations, and it's just a lot to figure out. So hopefully I can streamline it for you and get you the results you want, and in a way that also teaches you what changes what and why, because there's a lot. Now again, we're going to do a series because I don't want to shove everything into this. But here's the thing, okay? We're going to ignore the constraints for now because we can completely change the way our liquid acts without touching the properties of our liquid, because it's a particle sim. Okay? Remember that. Now, let's dive into that. Hit Control D. The first thing we're going to do, we're going to back this up. You have to back it up every time. We're going to change the default radius from 3 to 1. Now remember, it was like a blob. It went, but now that it's 1, check this out. Amazing. That's pretty good. That's water now. It's liquid. It's going in. It's splashing. And we haven't touched it. We just changed the size of the particles. So the default radius of the liquid sim is like kind of like the voxel size of something on a volume builder or a pyro. The smaller it gets, the more details it can fill in the space. And those things will be able to be closer together. So, you know, obviously water is made up of a lot of molecules or particles, and the more you can shove in there, the more detail you can get. But obviously the lower this number, the longer the render time and the simulation time is going to be. Well, I guess just mainly the simulation time. But yeah, so that's the first step, right? Okay, so we understand now that default radius needs to be changed, because that will completely affect the way that it looks before anything else. I think that is the setting that you need to get right first before you touch any other setting. And I'm not saying that one is right. It could need to be something else. But here's the thing I like to do next, okay? What I like to do now is go to simulate, and I go down to modifiers, and I turn on the color mapper. And this is just literally, this won't affect our water at all. We can make it, but we won't yet in this tutorial. But what it does is it helps me wrap my brain around the fact that we're messing with water particles, and it just makes it look better, which is nice. So we're going to grab the bottom knot here and turn it to dark blue. Grab the top knot, set it to white. Grab the middle knot, yank it out of there. Get out of there. All right, then we're going to change the property from age to velocity. Now you can do velocity speed if you want, but I think with water, especially with the fill emitter where you're like filling up a container or you have like a surface of water, velocity is good. Switch it to Y, lower this down to about 60 for the upper, and that's basically just going to say, hey, once you start moving, you see a particle that's moving closer to 60 centimeters a second, or a frame, probably a second, make it more white. If it's moving less, closer to 0, make it blue. So now, when we back this up and hit play, we're going to get blue, and then it's going to go splash, and our foam is going to be white, and it just helps my brain to see that it's water. And it's just easier to see the difference. We're getting the crown splash. We're looking pretty good. We're looking all right. And this is where I run into a cycle of just changing settings back and forth and balancing things and never getting it right, realizing I need to reset everything and start over. And that's just what I'm trying to prevent you from having to go through that headache. And so here's what we're going to do. First thing we're going to do, we're going to take our default radius. If you want something to be like watery, we're going to lower it down. We're going to lower it down to somewhere between 0.6 and 0.8. We can do 0.8 and see how that works, but it will fundamentally change entirely how your liquid reacts. We're going to hit play. And this is especially important for the liquid fill emitter. Boom. It's slower. Every time this number gets lower, it's going to take longer. But it looks better. Woo! Look at that. Not bad. All right. I'm happy with that. So now becomes what's next. Okay. So let me just show you what affects what and how, and then what we need to change next. Right? Yeah. Okay. So inside of the particles tab, what I like to do, and this is more important for the emitter than the fill emitter, but I like to take the field sampling variance up to 100%. That's going to make it a little more organic, and that helps blend emitter stuff better than when you start getting these little dashes. If you've seen that when you've been trying it out, that helps with that, as well as these sub-steps. Take these up to 10 or 12. This isn't really going to slow things down for this one in particular, and it's really just kind of a nicer, cleaner effect. So if you hit play now, we probably won't see that big of a difference, but those are very important for emitters. And if you're getting like weird gaps and things, this should help connect things and make things feel a little bit more organic and liquidy. But let's see. Let's see if our crown splash looks any different or anything, just changing those. It does look slightly different, but not that different. Cool. Good. So, that's fine. Do that. Now, this is where it gets crazy. Here's what we're going to do first. We're going to take the dampening, and normally what I like to do with liquid sims, so now we're going to take the dampening, and normally what I like to do with simulations is I increase the dampening. normally to make things just a little more under control. Now for liquid, I take it down. I go down to 0.5. I go down to 0.5, and I found that that's pretty good. You can play around with that. And then when it comes to the sub-steps, 20 is a good spot actually for this, but we can go lower to speed things up, but we lose the accuracy. And if we go higher, we might realize with more accuracy, we're not actually getting the results we want. And then we start having to tweak a bunch of things. So we're going to try to touch as few settings as possible while getting the results we want in this tutorial. So what I want to do is I want to take a smoothing iteration, turn it up to 1. For the collisions, we're going to go to 4, and then an extra pass of 1. Now, one thing I forgot to mention earlier for the collisions is for our container, it defaults set to volume. That is okay. Now, when I want to do my floor, I want to change like the floor to surface. Basically, if it's not like going inside of something, surface is just faster and better, I think. And then things like this work better with volumes. Okay, and it does help to have some thickness. Now, if you need it to collide with something that's thin, put a thicker object behind it in the same space, like make a variant of it, and then hide it so that it can use that invisible one as the, collision object. Whereas this will, you'll still only see the thin one. Okay, little trick. All right, so now we've changed some substeps. We've got the smoothing iterations. We've got the substeps set at 20. Particles, we're still at 0.8. We haven't touched anything else. Let's hit play on this just so we can get a frame of reference of what is going on right now. And again, you can just tell the color mapper just makes things look better, doesn't it? So much easier for my mind to understand. We're very splashy. That's not a bad thing. It's not bad. Boom. We've lost our crown splash. There it is. But it's a little crazy. So weird, right? That it's changed that much. Yeah. It does that. Okay, so now we can come in here, and if we want, we can mess with this. I don't think you should. Okay, but let me show you what can happen. You lower this down to 10. It will go twice as fast, but it will not be as accurate. But it might get you the results you want. It's worth a shot. Boom, everything's a lot more spray, a lot more loosey-goosey. I feel like this basically like loosens the bonds between the particles and how they're supposed to act, and you just get more chaos. But without all the little particle things around, it actually doesn't look that bad, right? That's a pretty good little crown splash we got there. Let's go down here and change it to 150. And let's split the difference here. Let's go with 15 here for the substeps. And again, it's going to go slightly faster, be more loosey-goosey, which might get you more of the results you want, because there are still other settings we can tweak to get this. Now, I said don't touch it, but here I am touching it. And this is what happens. I start touching things I shouldn't be touching, and then that's just, why does it sound so bad? All right, we're going to see what this looks like. It's completely different, right? It's so weird how different it is. I honestly liked the way it looked at 10 better. So let's go down to 10. Okay, let's do that. Let's do 10, and then we'll mess with the liquid settings. So again, we want to just get it close enough and ignore the particle like spray, because we can use that as foam, but really we'll probably, once we add the liquid mesh in here, we'll lose a lot of that. We'll just cull it right out of there. That's not bad. That looks watery. That looks pretty good. Okay. So, we just cut the substeps in half. Now, we might end up cranking those back up, but we'll see. Because here's what's really going to make a huge difference as well. And this is just the iterations in viscosity and surface tension. Now, these aren't settings changing the amount of viscosity and the amount of surface tension. It is just saying how many substeps basically or iterations it wants to run, which affect it quite a bit, as we'll find out. So if we were to come in here and take this viscosity up to 12, which is pretty high for this, what I found, it's going to act completely different, even though we haven't changed the actual viscosity of the liquid. Which again is just another issue, which makes it harder to learn. But we're getting a lot less splash, even with just 10 substeps. But now we're getting weird things where like that water droplets are splitting in half, and our splash is different, and it's just a lot more viscous looking, which in some ways is good. In some ways it's too much. So now we got to balance it, right? Well, let's just see what the surface tension does real quick. We'll take that, turn that up, and what we should get is more strands. So we'll see this. This might be more of the way that like Hideo Kojima would like to see a liquid sim. He's really a big fan of strand type liquid sims. Sorry, that's a really nerdy joke. Hopefully my gamer friends will get that out there. But yeah, you can see these strands. If you did, just leave a like. But look at these. Look at this. It's so much different, right? It's just crazy how different these two things can do when we actually haven't changed the settings of our liquid at all. So, what's the sweet spot? Well, we found that the simulation of 10 is pretty good. Let's try the iterations of 3 for the extra, 3 for the viscous, and 3 for the surface. Subtlety is king. Now, we should have a pretty nice balance between performance, result, viscosity, surface tension, all these things, by just adjusting a few things. Now, I think this might still be too much surface tension. Like, I don't like when the water raises up and hits itself as it's coming down. I don't like that. It doesn't feel right. I'm sure it is, but let's lower it all back down to 2, 2, and 2. And again, you can affect things in a different way. I could just take the viscosity up and turn the surface tension down. I could actually go into the liquid modifier and change the viscosity and the density of this liquid and stuff and see what we get. But I think we can get there with just a few clicks. This I like. This looks like liquid. This doesn't look like goo. I like it. Okay. Let's turn it into an actual mesh, because right now, as you see, it's not a mesh. It's just particles. Okay, normally at this point, what I would do is I'd come in here and I'd change these settings, and then I'd change these settings and see if I could get it to look any better. I did that off camera. I think what we have is the best. So now let's go ahead and talk about how to liquid mesh this, because that thing on its own is its own weird beast, and there's some settings I think I've found work the best for it. So let's go ahead and do that. That way we can actually turn this into liquid. Now the first thing we can do is, if we get to the point where we can make it liquid, like turn it into a mesh, we can cache our scene. So go into the particle group, turn on cache, cache the scene, save it, water tut 333, because there's a million of them, and let that go. All right, that's going to cache out your scene, your sim, so it doesn't have to run every time. You'll be able to scrub through your timeline. It's going to be much, much better and easier to work with. And so that helps a lot with adding in the liquid mesh. I would suggest doing this first before even messing with the liquid mesh. Okay, once that's done, we can now scrub through and see our liquid and actually see what it looks like in real time. So we hit play. Looking good. I'm quite happy with that. Now, we can't change it. It's cached. So I can't come in here with a cube and try to like make it collide with it now, because it's baked in there. Now we could just undo the cache. If you do want to make any changes, you'll have to uncache it, then recache it. Okay, so caching it is like, it's good. Let's just let it cook. So we like that. All right, so now, and also water in reverse, always cool, right? Nolan knew that, but then he did it too much with Tenet. Tenet, I don't fall asleep in movies. Okay, listen. I love movies. I've always loved movies. I've watched them forever. I don't fall asleep. I never fell asleep in school. Tenet, I tried to watch 3 times. I fell asleep every time. It was awful. It's awful. Anyway. All right, so let's liquid mesh this. Now, we're not going to talk about coloring it just yet. We're just going to talk about actually making it into a liquid mesh, because right now, if we were to hit render, it'd just be a lot of tiny little dots. So we want to get rid of those dots. So we're going to right click our particle group here, go to render tags and add a Redshift object tag on there. By default, that will disable our dots. That's good. That's what we want. Now we want to liquid mesh this. So we're going to go to simulate, and here we have liquid mesh. Boom. Add that. The default settings of liquid mesh are stupid. They're terrible. I don't know why they even exist. I'm so salty. I have done like 30 hours of this tutorial. Let me tell you. The last like 5 days I've been trying to get this honed in. So hopefully it's helpful. But we're going to fix it. So here's the things I like to do. To start off, we're going to take the scale down to 2. Now you can go down lower. I would go down as low as 1.4. But the next thing is we want to change it from relative mode to absolute, I think. But you might run into some issues where it might freeze and stuff. If you go too low with the relative to the absolute mode, you can firstly try to just increase the steps here in the relative mode, see if you get the results you want. It will take longer, you know. So we're going to go to absolute, and by default it's set to 1.5 for the voxel size. That's not bad, but we can do better. But just like Pyro or anything, the lower you go, the more likely you are to crash because it's just going to crank out more calculations and numbers and things. So we're going to go down to 1 is what I found is a pretty good spot. What I like to try to do is match the radius of my water, and setting this to 0.8 did cause some issues. So before we go down below 1, I want to set up some other things first, and that is go to smoothing. Turn that up to 5. Now, we can also increase this up to 100 if we want. And we've frozen. Okay, we're okay. And then we're going to go to the normals. And I like to do 64 normals, which is just going to smooth out the normals across it. Honestly, this should just be like a thing that we can toss on anything and just blend normals together. Back on. All right, processing for the artifacts. Don't touch this if you don't have to. Okay, this like save before you click this on if you're going to do it. It will get rid of a lot of these dots. But man, it hurts your machine. My machine cried when I turned it on. So the next thing I'm gonna do is actually just turn these down to 0 first, and you can lower them down to like 50 first if you want. But you can see that kind of cleared up a lot of those artifacts and stuff on its own without having to do this. So again, take everything with a grain of salt. Okay, now that we've got this kind of down, we can start lowering down the influence scale a bit and also increasing the surface offset. I like to crank that back up to 1. But sometimes that can cause some issues. So, okay, so we'll leave these two things how they are. You can go lower. I would go as low as like 1.4 for this. And then the surface offset you can adjust up and down if you want. Think of it like as an expand and dilate from the volume builder kind of thing. But yeah, let's just take a look at this. So let's go in here and we'll grab water from Redshift. And toss that on our liquid mesh. We've got our particle. We've got a Redshift object tag on our particle group. And that's on so that our particles don't render. So all we'll see is the mesh. We're going to save. So I don't want to do all this again. And then I'm going to hit play. And voila, there we go. We've got absolutely nothing. So in the liquid mesh, much like Pyro, you have to tell it to render. On. Normals on. Now, density, color, and velocity will only create vertex maps, and we'll talk about those in a later lesson because it's very cool. But look, we have water, and it looks kind of nice in this weird little setting that we have here. Toss it on the background, toss that on our container, just so it has something on it. There we go. There we go. We actually have water splashing out. We should be able to click through here. And it will calculate that volume. And it looks pretty good. And when we render this out, it should look pretty good. Again, there we go. Now, this is the cool part, right? Now you've got the hard part out of the way. Now you can start playing around with cool stuff, like throwing on things that aren't liquid on there and having very weird results, like mermaid scales on something. Things that shouldn't have textures and things that do. You can make it, you could grab a gold from like scratch gold. Let's do like a brushed gold. Toss that on there. Boom. Now you've got luxury. Pretty cool, right? Or, you know, make it creepy. Let's go ahead and do like a red glass, red. Let's do that. Toss that on. And then, you know, you lower the depth of that. And now you've got something real spooky. One thing that I think is really fun is to do emissive materials as liquids. I think they just look cool when liquids are glowing and it lights things up. It's very nice. And it also hides a lot of imperfections within the mesh itself. But yeah, let's do water for this. Cool. I'm quite happy with that. Let's grab like a terrazzo maybe for our pot. Our cube here. We'll toss it on that. Terrazzo. Set it to cubic, and we'll probably need to make it smaller, like 0.2 and 0.2. There we go. And then we can just use, we'll just leave it white for the background. That's fine. Play, and then let's go ahead and mess with our lighting. Let's take our dome light, lower it down like 0.2. I want it to be more just built around this area light, which we're gonna shoot off to the side to create some shadows here. Spread it out a bit. And maybe lower down the intensity, but make it a little sharper. Like that. And then we can slide that back. And then, once again, increase it back up since we got further away. There we go. But now we kind of have that nice kind of splat look. I don't know. It's not ideal. Maybe bring some of this back up. There we go, and we can mess with the depth of this water. Lower it down to make it more blue. I think that's probably fine, like that. I think that looks cool. I like that. Yeah. Let's do something like that. Let's add the camera real quick and switch it to have bokeh. Toggle it on so it's right there. Switch that down to like 1.4, and then go lower. There we go. Now we've got this kind of nice little tilt shift effect. Let's maybe that's like too much. Do it like that. But yeah. Cool. So we won't cover foam and stuff in this one, but that is kind of hopefully the settings that can get you jump started. So this will be available to download on my Patreon and for free with the link below, to get you started with liquids. So again, to recap, we did all of this without touching these settings. We can still do that and change things if we want, but we didn't have to. The main thing we did was in the simulations. We lowered the simulations down to 10. We switched the particles up to 10 in this. That probably helps some, maybe not so much in this one. In the liquids, this is the main thing. We turned the default radius size down and the extra iterations up slightly, but that is it. And we got some good results. That's it. It's that simple. Why'd that take me 50 hours to teach you and learn and figure out how to portray? I don't know, but it did. Okay? So enjoy that. See you next time.